Pirates were the big theme of Fox Kids' inaugural 1990-91 season. The network was arguably built around Peter Pan and the Pirates, an original adaptation of J.M. Barrie's classic play and novel. But that wasn't the only pirate-themed show the network launched that year. For 1 week in February 1991, Peter Pan's weekday slot would be taken up by Dark Water, a 5-episode miniseries produced by Hanna-Barbera. Fox Kids only aired those 5 episodes, but the soon-to-be retitled Pirates of Dark Water eked out a further 16 episodes through stints on ABC and the syndicated Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera. While the show was not a success, and its story never finished, Dark Water is nevertheless a cult triumph, and one of the most underrated shows of a landmark decade in animation. So, let's set sail with the Pirates of Dark Water.
Kids Club!
Kids Club!
The alien world of Myrr is being devoured by dark water. Only Ren, a young prince, can stop it by finding the lost 13 treasures of wool. At his side is an unlikely but loyal crew of misfits. At his back, the evil pirate lord Bloth, who will stop at nothing to get the treasures for himself. It's high adventure with the Pirates of Dark Water.
Hey, if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, it helps it in the algorithm. Also, sign up at patreon.com/JessMatthewsProductions to support my videos. And you can also contribute $50 for a pick of the week single episode review of any kid show out there. Your support makes everything I do possible. Thanks. The land of Myrr is under attack. Dark water blots the land, a poisonous presence that engulfs everything in its path. Entire civilizations have fallen to its wrath. Ren, a young man raised in a lighthouse, encounters an old man who washes up on his shores one day. To his shock, he finds the old man is actually his father, Primus, who was the king of the nearby Octopon, a once glittering, now dead city. Ren is in fact the prince, and with Primus's dying breath, he asks Ren to seek out the dragon Alamar and learn his destiny. But Ren is quickly captured by Lord Bloth, a hulking brute of a pirate who commands the massive ship Maelstrom, and who is holding Primus prisoner. Ren escapes the ship with the help of the monkey bird Niddler, whose cowardice is matched only by his cravings for megamelons, and the two travel to the Abbey of Galdabar where they find Alamar. There he gives Ren a magic compass and tasks him with finding the 13 treasures of rule. After narrowly escaping Bloth and his henchmen, the two travel to Jondatown, a local hive of scum and villainy, where they meet up with Ayaz, a charming rogue with his own ship, the Wraith. And by his own ship, I mean some random vessel he just stole. The ship has a stowaway, Tula, a barmaid who can hold her own in a fight, but who seemingly has her own agenda. Using the compass, they are able to find the first treasure of rule, and they set out to find the remaining 12. With Bloth always at their heels. What I just described is the very packed first episode. The first 5 episodes of Dark Water are continuity heavy, at least continuity heavy by the standards of 1991, and the rest of the series maintains a strong thematic storyline throughout. While episodes can be enjoyed randomly after the miniseries, it's really recommended to watch all the episodes in order. The world of Myrr is vibrant and alive in much the same way a good fantasy or sci-fi story is. Darkwater is a pirate show, but it's a pirate show by way of Star Wars or Legend of Zelda. The denizens of Myrr come in all colors, shapes, and sizes. The architecture is fascinatingly alien. The Maelstrom is, as the writer's Bible states, built from the bleached carcasses of leviathans, and it looks like a giant floating fossil. It also boasts a large multi-headed serpent called the Constrictus in its bowels. The biosphere hosts creatures as colorful as the half-simian, half-parrot monkey birds and the flying Mount Dagrans. It really looks imaginative. Even the language is colorful. Dialogue is peppered with what I can only describe as alien curse words.
Noisy tat! Can this be the Dark Dweller's domain?
But to them you may be a king. To me, you're still just a chitatin monkey bird.
That means a royal regal monkey bird, right, Ayaz?
Something like that. Chungo Longo!
Darkwater voiced an impressive voice cast. Instead of using stereotypical cartoon voice actors, the show chose to cast people not necessarily known for their cartoon voice acting work. The role of Ren would be played by George Newbern. Newbern is an accomplished character actor in live action, and at the time of Darkwater he was best known for roles in Adventures in Babysitting, Switching Channels, and Designing Women. These days he's probably best known as Charlie in Scandal, but the people watching this video would know him far, far better as the voice of Theodore Rex in the 1995 Whoopi Goldberg classic of the same name.
That is so sweet. You know, this looks like fun. Can I play?
Hey, Teddy Rex.
Do you play?
Oh, yeah. I'm amazing. What, are you kidding? I got a room full of trophies at home. They retired my jersey. I even have a candy bar named after me.
Hey.
What?
Stop that.
For those of you who don't appreciate cinema, Newbern is best known as the voice of Superman in Justice League Unlimited, and countless other DC Comics projects, and as the English voice of Sephiroth in countless Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts games.
You must believe me. We have a chance to stop the Darkwater with one blow, and we're taking it. On to Benjamar! I've watched every step, every struggle. But Vanna, Rao, help me. But I don't think you're real. I don't think any of this is real.
Good to see you, Cloud.
Ayaz is originally voiced by Hector Elizondo, a character actor with a long resume in film and television, but he's perhaps most notable for his stint on Chicago Hope from 1994 to 2000. He also has DC voice acting experience, voicing Bane in Batman: Mystery of the Batwoman.
These eyes can spot landlubbers who could use the experience of a true seaman, and these ears know when they hear talk of treasure.
Penguin, I have reviewed your proposal for my employment. I'm sorry, but your terms are not acceptable. I want carte blanche, complete control of the operation. I answer to no one.
No one can quit being who they really are, not even a princess. Now, you can refuse the job, but you are a princess by birth.
How can I tell if I can even do the job?
By simply trying. Like the fancy dinner coming up. She thinks you're ready.
The role of Niddler was originally played by the great Roddy McDowall. It's fitting that the monkey bird Niddler was played by one of cinema's greatest simians, as McDowall was, of course, Cornelius and Caesar in the original Planet of the Apes films.
Pretty proud of yourself, I see. And why not? From this day on, the world will no longer see monkey birds as slaves, and I was part of that. Thanks to you. friend. I guess there is hope for my quest after all.
And we shall build our own cities in which there will be no place for humans except to serve our ends. And we shall found our own armies, our own religion, our own dynasty. And that day is upon you now!
Perhaps the one actor with the most notable voice acting experience was Jodie Benson. Mostly because she was just over a year removed from her role as Ariel in The Little Mermaid. Before that, most of her experience was primarily on the stage. In fact, she got her role in Little Mermaid because she had worked with the film's songwriter, Howard Ashman, on an earlier Broadway musical.
Taron, I've been sent to rescue you. Since your capture, Andoris has suffered much decay.
Escape is futile. I can't leave my...
But I must free you. As an Ecoman's healer, you are my island's only hope.
My child.
I want to be where the people are. I want to see them dancing, walking around on those, what do you call them? Oh, feet.
Now, I'm just gonna put this here. Dark Water betrays a decidedly Eastern influence. All three of the human main characters are notably dark-skinned, and to my eye look decidedly Middle Eastern. You may notice that only Ayaz was played by an actor of color. And I realize that a lot of this is the show being of its time. We've only just recently figured out that, hey, maybe characters of color should be played by actors of color. Maybe a white guy shouldn't be playing a poo. But that being said, the practice is still shitty. If Dark Water was made today, I'd hope that greater consideration be taken in casting. But I digress. On the villain side, Brock Peters voices Lord Bloth. Peters was Tom Robinson in the film adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird. But most people watching this video will know him for his notable supporting roles in the Star Trek franchise. Most notably, he was Joseph Sisko, father of Deep Space Nine Captain Benjamin Sisko.
Mantus, don't frighten the man. After all, the old Brigmaster used to interrupt me as well, and we were the best of friends. Before his accident, of course.
I wish I could, but what you're asking me to do is wrong. You can't go around making people prove they are who they say they are. That's no way to live.
Bloth's most notable henchman is the short and bumbling, one-legged, pig-like conch, who is voiced by Tim Curry. He's best known for his role as Premier Anatoly Cherdenko in Command & Conquer Red Alert 3.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
This isn't the last time Curry will feature on a Fox Kids show this year, because he has an even greater role in flagship show Peter Pan and the Pirates, where he plays Captain Hook.
I was just getting to that.
Now.
I lost them to Ios and that she-devil friend of his. But I fought a valiant fight and single-handedly vanquished 20 of your worst enemies.
Now we'll see how much use eternal youth will be to Peter Pan when he's 40 fathoms under!
If I had a nickel for every time Curry played a major role in a first-year Fox Kids pirate show, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. A ton of folks worked on Dark Water, and there were major changes to the creative team throughout the show's run. Instead of just listing them all here, I'm gonna cover them as we go through the show's run. But there's one person we need to talk about right here, right now. The man with the created by credit for this entire show. The head of Hanna-Barbera Productions at the time, David Kirschner. Kirschner got his start with the storybook Rose Petal Place. This storybook spawned a line of dolls by Kenner, and since this is the 1980s, a series of animated specials produced at Ruby Spears, at the time the sister studio to Hanna-Barbera. The specials didn't lead to a full series, but that's okay because Kirschner had moved to bigger things by that point. He began shopping around a story idea for an animated film, and it goes without saying that he went to Disney, who promptly rejected him, noting incredulously that nobody would watch his film, which was about a Jewish mouse. He took the idea to Steven Spielberg, who partnered with Don Bluth, and they turned the idea into An American Tail, the highest grossing animated film of 1986, beating Disney's Great Mouse Detective. Turns out people would watch a film about a Jewish mouse. The success of An American Tail made Kirschner an in-demand producer in Hollywood, but he didn't want to be typecast on family fare. So one of his pet ideas was to make a movie about a killer doll, and he signed on to produce a script by Don Mancini called Child's Play. Child's Play was the first movie to star the iconic killer doll Chucky, and it spawned a franchise that continues to this day. It's ironic that Kirschner was so involved with kids' properties in his career, because if there is one lasting contribution to American culture that he made, it's producing the Chucky movies. By 1989, he was clearly an in-demand producer in Hollywood, which makes his next career move a bit of an odd turn. Hanna-Barbera had been in decline since it hit its peak in the 1970s. Sure, it had scored a massive hit with the Smurfs, but that show was 8 years old, practically geriatric in kid show terms. It had not found the next big hit, and it more or less sat out the syndication boom of the 1980s. Marvel, DiC, and even sister studio Ruby Spears all embraced this wave with hip, toyetic programming, and Hanna-Barbera largely stuck with its classic characters, with revivals of the Jetsons and Yogi Bear. Great America, then Hanna-Barbera's owner, wanted to revitalize the struggling studio, so they kicked the studio's founders to vice president positions and brought in Kirschner to be the studio's CEO. And Kirschner's mandate would be to make the studio the next Disney. The Eisner-Wells-Katzenberg trio had been running the Magic Kingdom for 5 years at that point, and a lot of its efforts were starting to pay off. Increased investment in the parks, a thriving adult film division in Touchstone, and a splashy entrance into television animation. Lots of Hanna-Barbera's initiatives would be directly inspired by Disney. They signed a deal with Universal to have a presence in their new Orlando theme park. They made a greater investment into feature films, signing another deal with Universal to do a live-action Flintstones movie. They even started their own Touchstone, Bedrock Productions. But the bread and butter was always going to be their television animation studio, and Kirschner brought with him a binder full of original ideas to put into production, many of which had been shopped around to studios all over Hollywood. Instead of playing with other companies' literal toys, they were going to make their own. Dark Water was one of those ideas. Kirschner had been working on the concept since 1983 and had been shopping it around for most of the decade. In fact, Paramount had already acquired the rights to the idea and had actually put it into development. But with Kirschner taking over Hanna-Barbera, he no longer had the time to be on the set for the movie's production. But more importantly, the opportunity to do Dark Water as an animated project unshackled by the limitation of budget and special effects that you would have on a live-action production, was just too good to pass up. This is probably a good place to note that Dark Water shares some structural similarities to an earlier Hanna-Barbera cartoon, The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. The last series of Scooby's original run, this revamp sees Scooby, Shaggy, Scrappy, Daphne, and new character Flim Flam circling the globe to capture 13 ghosts they inadvertently released. Now, I don't think this was intentional, and beyond the basic structure, the two shows don't really have that much in common, but as an avid watcher of Cartoon Network, I did pick up on those similarities. Hanna-Barbera sank a lot of money into Dark Water, at least initially. The first 5 episodes were the most expensive project that the studio had made up until that point, costing $500,000 an episode. And that money can be seen on screen. This is beautiful animation on par with the best episodes of Batman the Animated Series. That high budget was a double-edged sword. Fox Kids, which picked up the miniseries, was only going to cover half the license fee of the show, and the other half would have to be made up with foreign broadcast fees, releases on home video, and yes, merchandising. But while Dark Water would be supported by a toy line, that wasn't the main concern behind the show. It wasn't being made to sell toys like a He-Man or a Transformers. As a storyteller, I've always been bothered when the guys from Madison Avenue make a toy and then create an animated show to sell it. This is something I've been working on since 1983, but the merchandise is just part of a campaign that focuses on the story itself. What merchandising exists, however, is pretty minimal. Dark Water did get a toy line from Hasbro, but it's pretty small, incorporating only a playset of the hero's ship, the Wraith, and a handful of action figures. Ren, Bloth, Niddler, Ayaz, Conk, but no Tula, because heaven forbid girls buy action figures. The show isn't toyetic at all, because if it was, we'd see all sorts of action features on the ships to make them so irresistible that kids would be begging their parents to buy them. It's refreshing for the time, but it also hampered one of the possible revenue streams that could have ensured a longer run for the show. And as we'll see, it kind of needed that cushion, because the story of Dark Water is not a story that's contained to just Fox Kids. We're gonna talk about the show's run on not 1, not 2, but on 3 separate broadcast blocks. Buckle up, it's gonna be a bumpy ride. Dark Water was one of the shows that Fox Kids picked up for its first season in 1990-91. Margaret Loesch was, by all accounts, impressed with the pitch, and she decided to pick it up as a 5-episode miniseries. Fox Kids had a limited amount of space for its shows during its first year, 3 hours on Saturdays and a half hour on weekdays, and all those spots were spoken for. To add variety to the weekday lineup, the network sought to pick up several 5-episode miniseries to air during the 1991 mid-season. These would essentially be test runs. If the miniseries did well, it could be picked up for a weekly run the next year, and potentially a daily run down the road. Several 80s cartoons had gotten their start as 5-episode miniseries, but the most notable was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Playmates Toys bankrolled a 5-episode miniseries to run during the 1987-88 season, and the miniseries did well enough that weekly, then daily syndication quickly followed. By 1990, the Ninja Turtles were the hottest thing going. While nobody expected Darkwater to get anywhere close to the Ninja Turtles, there was potential for it to be a foundation for the small but growing network. Darkwater was set to be one of 2 miniseries for 1990-91, alongside a pickup that centered on superheroes. That pickup would be X-Men. Yes, X-Men was originally set to come from Marvel Productions and was set to be a 5-episode miniseries during the 1990-91 season. Obviously, neither of those things happened, but it's notable that X-Men was in the planning stages very early on for Fox Kids. Instead, X-Men's spot would be taken by Swamp Thing. Don't worry, we'll get to that. The miniseries looks gorgeous. Easily some of the best animation in a Hanna-Barbera show, well, ever. A far cry from the Huckleberry Hound days. The miniseries had some absolutely gorgeous animation by studios like Madhouse and Mr. Big Cartoons. It's animation that easily rivals some of the work that TMS was doing on Warner Brothers shows of the era. The 5-episode miniseries was produced by John Dorman. Dorman was at sister studio Ruby Spears for a very long time, working on shows like the original Heathcliff, Centurions, and Turbo Teen. Why does Turbo Teen keep coming up? After Darkwater, he worked primarily as a storyboard artist, and his resume includes a slew of big Fox Kids shows. He worked on Tick, Spider-Man, Silver Surfer, and even The Ripping Friends. He also contributed artwork for, and this is true, the very first Leprechaun movie. Most of the original miniseries was co-written by Lane Reichert. Reichert got his start as a writer on the Flintstones comedy show, one of the many Saturday morning Flintstones spin-offs. After that, he bounced between writer and storyboard gigs on shows like Quickie Koala, Snorks, and Challenge of the GoBots. Perhaps his most notable gig at Hanna-Barbera was on the excellent Pup Named Scooby-Doo, where he started as a story editor and moved to a producer role after Tom Ruegger went over to WB to do Tiny Toon Adventures. After Darkwater, Reichert did some work on other Hanna-Barbera shows like Two Stupid Dogs and the later seasons of Captain Planet. His most notable credit would be as one of the architects for the seminal 1994 computer animated series, Reboot. Fox Kids made Darkwater into an event. Promos featured the booming voice of Don LaFontaine, the inner world guy who was the movie trailer dude in the 90s. There was a contest as well, tying into the growing number of Fox Kids clubs across the country. But the results left something to be desired. Despite all of the promotion, Darkwater ultimately was not successful enough to be picked up for a full season at Fox Kids. According to Margaret Lesh, when I spoke to her last year, this underperformance came down to the show not having enough girl appeal. And David Kirschner was not happy. David got very upset with me when I didn't pick up the series, and he expressed his anger quite colorfully. I had no complaints about the production. However, I did worry about having no girl appeal, which is what the ratings reflected, and it didn't do as well as we had hoped. We gave it a lot of hype, we gave it a lot of promotion, and kids just decided they weren't interested. My job was to deliver successes for the affiliates, which I always had to remind myself. I was looking for quality shows. That was a quality show. But it doesn't work for us if it doesn't deliver ratings. And when we did all the backup research after it aired, I had to deliver the bad news to David Kirschner, and boy was he mad at me. I think he hated me for that. Now, I think a full series of Darkwater would have made a great fit on Fox Kids. In 1994, when the network's brand was pretty firmly built on superheroes and action-adventure shows. In 1991, the network was still figuring out what worked and what didn't work. And I'd argue they didn't figure it out until Batman and X-Men showed up in fall '92. Not only that, but they could get away with lesser performing shows by 1994 because they had bigger successes. You could afford to keep Anique the Cat on the air because Power Rangers was raking in all the big bucks. There was room for experimentation. But in 1991, the network's biggest show wasn't Power Rangers, but Peter Pan and the Pirates. A show that was such a bomb that Fox Broadcasting president Jamie Kellner had to apologize to the affiliates. So Margaret Loesch passed on the show, and as we'll see, I don't think it's hard to argue with her decision. After Fox Kids declined to pick up Darkwater for a full season, that left Hanna-Barbera in the position of searching for a new network to air the show. This was David Kirschner's passion project after all, and he wanted to make sure it got a fair shake. Hanna-Barbera was producing Pup Named Scooby-Doo for ABC at the time, so there was an active relationship there. According to an interview with Lane Reichert, the then producer for Pup Named Scooby-Doo, Hanna-Barbera essentially made the network an offer it couldn't refuse for Darkwater, scheduling more planned episodes of Pup Named Scooby-Doo in the process. They'd finance nearly all of the cost of the show's first season, and in exchange, ABC would air it for next to nothing. ABC quickly took them up on the offer, and Darkwater had a home for the 1991-92 season. Likely because of this, the ABC run would only feature 8 newly produced episodes alongside the already produced Fox Kids miniseries. This creates some dispute as to how best to break up the show. Some sources lumped the first 13 episodes together as a season 1. Wikipedia, for its part, simply lists the first 5 episodes as the miniseries and the second 8 as season 1. That's what I'm actually going to go with because there were enough changes between the miniseries and season 1 that warrant the distinction. What were these changes? Well, for one, there was an updated title, changing from just Darkwater to the more descriptive Pirates of Darkwater. Alongside the new title came a new opening credits sequence, with a voiceover helpfully explaining the premise of the show to any new viewers picking it up for the first time. The second major change concerns one member of the voice cast. You might have been surprised when I said Roddy McDowall voiced Niddler. That's because he was switched out after the miniseries, with voice acting legend Frank Welker taking over the role. While Welker would voice Niddler in all episodes going forward, for consistency's sake, he would also dub over McDowall's performance in the original 5 episodes on their ABC rebroadcasts. As you can see, it's a decidedly different take.
I owe you my life, Niddler. You have my deepest thanks.
Keep your thanks. I only saved you on the chance you could find me some food.
But there's no time for that. The future of Octopon rests in my hands.
Honey, my grip seems to be getting weaker.
All right. I know where we can find some food. It's called the Abbey of Galdabar.
Galdabar? That doesn't sound very appetizing.
I owe you my life, Niddler. You have my deepest thanks.
Keep your thanks. I only saved you on the chance you could find me some food.
But there's no time for that. The future of Octopon rests in my hands.
Funny, my grip seems to be getting weaker.
All right. I know where we can find some food. It's called the Abbey of Galdabar.
Galdabar? That doesn't sound very appetizing.
These ABC masters became the basis of all future broadcasts. If you watch the show in syndication, on Cartoon Network, or on DVD, it's always Pirates of Darkwater and Frank Welker as Niddler. I was unable to obtain a copy of the Fox broadcast of Dark Water, but based on the short clips floating around on YouTube, I prefer Welker's take. It just fits the character more. Other changes don't become apparent until episode 6, Andoris, the first newly produced ABC episode. This is an episode spotlighting Tula, who gets a new outfit and awakens as an ecomancer. This gives her the power to use the energy of the earth to get the crew out of scrapes, and gives her what is basically Spidey sense that warns her of danger. Effectively, she's now the crew's resident wizard. While it fits with Darkwater's established lore, ecomancers were introduced at the tail end of the miniseries, it also feels like a way to address Lesh's concerns about girl appeal by giving Tula a somewhat more active role. But it also feels like it could be influenced from the show's new network. See, one of ABC's biggest hits at the time was The Real Ghostbusters. The Ghostbusters' mouthy receptionist, Janine, was reworked a few years into the show's run, giving her a new voice actress, a softer appearance and personality, and a more active role as a member of the team. The changes were so drastic that returning writer J. Michael Straczynski wrote an episode of the show explaining them in storyline. The changes to Tula are not as dramatic, and they do fit into the overall lore of the show, even if they feel like somewhat of a left turn from what the miniseries was setting her up to be. Now, was ABC responsible for these changes? Did Hanna-Barbera make the changes on their own? I personally don't know, but if I had to guess, I think it was a mixture of both. There's one more notable change, and that's to the animation quality. Remember, Fox Kids was putting up half the budget for the miniseries, but ABC got the show, remember, for next to nothing. That left Hanna-Barbera with two choices: take on the entirety of the $500,000 per episode budget by itself, or slash it down to something more manageable. Not surprisingly, they took the latter option. Every episode from season 1 onwards was contracted out to Phil Cartoons in the Philippines, one of Hanna-Barbera's go-to animation houses. I hesitate to call the animation here bad. It's serviceable if a little clunky. They clearly struggle with some of the character models, however. Poor Ayaz looks strikingly off-model half the time. They struggle with a huge amount of lines in his design. This budget reduction might also explain why Roddy McDowall was swapped out, and while I have seen rumors to that effect, nothing has ever been confirmed. The show becomes more episodic at this point, regularly taking time away from finding the treasures and focusing a bit more towards exploring various parts of the world of Myrr. Niddler becomes king of an island of monkey birds without wings. The crew falls afoul of a wizard collecting chips by shrinking them and stealing their treasure. Perhaps the strongest episode of the ABC run is A Drop of Darkness, the second episode of the season and the 7th episode overall. The crew of the Wraith encounters an alchemist, Cray, who is searching for a sample of dark water. They save her, and it's revealed that she is an old acquaintance of Primus. Cray, it turns out, harbored an obsessive crush on Primus, and now she has her sights set on his son. She enchants Tula into a deep slumber and basically extorts Ren, Ayaz, and Niddler. If they get her to Darkwater, she will release Tula from her spell. When Cray gets to Darkwater, she mixes it in a formula and her youth is restored. But when Ren spurns her advances, she takes them all prisoner and steals the treasures. Cray aligns with Bloth and works out a deal. She'll give Bloth the Treasures of Rule if he officiates the shotgun wedding between her and Ren. But before they can say I do, the dark water begins seeping through her body. Turns out, if you use dark water in a potion, it poisons you from the inside. Bloth turns on Cray, and before he's able to kill Ren and crew, she unleashes exploding bubbles throughout her castle. Cray gives Ren the treasures as part of a bouquet before melting to death. A shockingly gruesome end for 90s Saturday morning television. This is my favorite episode. It's densely plotted from start to finish, it's filled with twists and turns, and some insane plot details. It's just a trip from start to finish. Season 1 story editor was Alan Burnett. Burnett had worked for Hanna-Barbera previously, cutting his teeth on the later seasons of the Super Friends. He then moved over to Disney TV Animation, where he worked on a bunch of the early Disney afternoon shows, and contributed the screenplay to DuckTales the movie, Treasures of the Lost Lamp. His next show after Darkwater would be at Warner Brothers, where he worked on some little-known cartoon about a guy who dresses up as a bat and beats up crooks. Season 1's producer was Mario Peluso, who had a long career in television animation bouncing between Filmation, Hanna-Barbera, and Marvel Productions throughout the 70s and 80s. His most notable credits outside of Darkwater are as associate producer on Denver the Last Dinosaur and as supervising director on Cat Dog. Season 1 concludes with The Dark Dweller, where Rang finally confronts the true big bad of the series, the Dark Dweller, voiced by Welker in a voice that's a combo of Megatron and Dr. Claw. The Dark Dweller resides at the center of Myrr itself and was being kept in check by the 13 Treasures of Rule, but when they were ripped from their resting place, the Dark Dweller grew in power, as his presence seeped through the world in the form of the Dark Water. But Pirates of Dark Water faced an even bigger villain than the Dark Dweller: persistent low ratings. Even despite essentially getting Dark Water for free, the show evidently didn't perform well enough for ABC and it wasn't renewed for another season. This was a resounding vote of no confidence. The show is now cancelled from 2 different networks. But despite that, this still wasn't the end of Pirates of Darkwater. Oh no. Hanna-Barbera was going to give it one last shot by bypassing the networks altogether. While Hanna-Barbera traditionally relied more on the networks and largely stayed out of the syndicated toy cartoon business, they did start dipping their toes into syndication in the mid-80s. They produced a series of TV movies called The Superstars 10 that would be syndicated out to local stations across the country. They also launched a new weekend block known as the Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera. Funtastic World would serve as Darkwater's new home for the 1992-93 season. And like Season 1, Season 2 would consist of 8 new episodes animated by Phil Cartoons in the Philippines. There were further crew changes behind the scenes. Kaz Anzalotti became the producer of Season 2. Anzalotti has a long resume in animation, originally working for the Terrytoon studio under Gene Deitch and Ralph Bakshi. Anzalotti moved over to Bakshi's own studio where he worked on the later seasons of the 60s Spider-Man cartoon and on the infamous Fritz the Cat. In the 80s, he had a long stint at Ruby Spears, working as a supervisor or producer on shows like Sectars and Turbo Teen. What did I say about putting that show in these videos? Alan Burnett puttered off to do that Bat Guy cartoon for Fox Kids, something I'm sure had no impact on the network or the industry whatsoever, and the story editor position was filled by Glenn Leopold. Leopold was a longtime writer for Hanna-Barbera, working on shows like Scooby-Doo and the Smurfs. This focus on sugary kids shows evidently spawned a desire to work on horror movies, as Leopold co-wrote The Prowler and Too Scared to Scream with Neil Barbera. Yes, that is Joe Barbera's son. Therefore, it shouldn't surprise you that episodes of Season 2 frequently had more of a horror bent, particularly the episodes The Dark Disciples and The Ghost Pirates. The Dark Disciples is a soft reset for the series. Ren returns to Octopon, which is now the domain of Morpho, a former alchemist who was captured by the Dark Dweller and turned into his grotesque servant. He in turn has turned most of the surviving residents of Octopon into his Dark Disciples. Morpho takes the crew hostage, while the Dark Dweller summons himself to destroy Ren once and for all. In the end, the crew of the Wraith used the 7 treasures collected so far to drive the Dark Dweller deeper underground. At the end of the episode, half of Octopon is restored, Morpho joins Bloth's crew, and the crew sets off to get the remaining 6 treasures, which are implied to have taken on new forms. Ghost Pirates is probably the best episode of Season 2, a crackerjack yarn where Ayaz is captured by a ghost ship, and the longer he remains on it, the more of him turns into a ghost. Tula has to basically put Ren into a coma so his spirit is actually able to fight the ghost, while all the while they're trying to evade Bloth. It's wild stuff, and an example of just how dense these plots typically get. Throwing Ren and the crew into a situation with a bad guy of the week, then throwing Bloth into the mix mid-episode to make things extra spicy. Frankly, I'd call Season 2 the best of the lot as far as the show's writing goes. It's just really inventive and really dense. Even the stock body swap episode they do is pretty top-notch, though part of that is the frankly incredible job George Newbern does as Bloth in Ren's body. He's clearly having a blast, and you can tell this is a future Sephiroth in action.
Blast you! Careful, Niddler.
Sorry, Bloth, Rin, but me just learning to fly.
Tata, Bloth. You'll never get away with it!
I already have, boy! I already have!
There is one supposed voice change, but either that's incorrect information or the change is so subtle I don't even hear it. According to a few sources online, Hector Elizondo only did a few episodes of the show's 2nd season, and the role of Ayaz would be taken over by Jim Cummings. This of course meant that the only person of color amongst the heroes was swapped out for yet another white guy. Not ideal. But I'm honestly skeptical that the claim is true in the first place. I guess others might hear it, but I can tell a Jeff Bergman Bugs Bunny apart from a Greg Burson Bugs Bunny or an Eric Bauza Bugs Bunny. I can usually tell if a voice actor has changed, and I just don't hear any differences here. Also, Jim Cummings has a very identifiable voice. To my ear, whoever's voicing Ayaz just doesn't sound like him. If I had to guess, Elizondo is Ayaz for the entire run. There's no way to check either. Hanna-Barbera used generic credits that didn't change from episode to episode, nor did they identify what roles each actor played. Hector Elizondo is therefore credited in every Season 2 episode. It's not possible to even confirm he was replaced just by looking at the credits. If there is a criticism I can level at Season 2, it's to the pacing. By the last episode of Season 1, the crew had found 7 of the treasures. In all of Season 2, they find a grand total of 1 additional treasure. This speaks to some failure of planning here. When this season was greenlit, Hanna-Barbera had to have known that it was likely going to be the last one if ratings didn't pick up. The lack of progress makes me think that some of the Season 2 scripts were unused from Season 1 and were picked to keep costs low. Darkwater's 21st episode, The Living Treasure, aired on May 23, 1993. It ends with Ren and the crew of the Wraith setting sail after a brief layover in Octopon, continuing their quest to find the last 5 treasures of Rule. And that was basically it. Darkwater just suddenly ended after 3 seasons, and we would never see them complete their quest. An anticlimactic end to what was a pretty great and ambitious series. So why was it never finished? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Darkwater is a cult success, yes. But oftentimes, cult is shorthand for nobody watched it during its original run. And that is true of Darkwater. This show aired on 3 networks, and by all accounts, it was a failure on all 3 of them. Fox didn't pick up the show beyond the miniseries. ABC was done with it after their run of 8 episodes, despite getting the show essentially for free, and it likely didn't make much of an impact when it was running on a little scene syndication block. This thing had more chances than most animated shows typically get, and it likely carried on through David Kirschner's sheer force of will. As long as he was the boss, this show had a chance to air somewhere. But by 1993, David Kirschner wasn't the boss anymore. As Pirates of Dark Water's first season was unspooling on ABC, Hanna-Barbera was purchased by Turner Broadcasting. We covered this last time when we talked about Tom and Jerry Kids, but the purchase put everything at HB in a state of flux. Turner bought the studio for its library, using it as programming for its cable channel and ultimately forming the core of Cartoon Network. While some of billionaire Ted's subordinates wanted to shut the studio down, Ted himself overruled them. Not the first or even the most notable time, as fans of wrestling will attest. That being said, the studio was losing money, and Turner Entertainment president Scott Sassa opted to make a change at the top. Fred Siebert, the man who was behind the iconic Nickelodeon and MTV brands, was brought in as Hanna-Barbera's new president, initially serving under Kirschner. And just the choice of him as president showcases how things were going to be different at the studio. David Kirschner was a hotshot Hollywood producer who worked on An American Tail and was trying to make the studio the next Disney. Siebert was a fan of Huckleberry Hound and all the classic Hanna-Barbera characters, and he wanted to return the studio to those glory days. That meant a focus on more creator-driven comedies with strong angular designs, pretty much the opposite of Darkwater. Shows like Two Stupid Dogs and Dexter's Laboratory formed the backbone of the new Hanna-Barbera, and while the studio kept making action cartoons, they were made with that same emphasis on strong, angular design and more dynamic animation. Anzalotti and Leopold transferred over to work on SWAT Cats, a brilliant show with a far more distinctive art style than any season of Darkwater. They then worked on 2 halves of the legendarily troubled Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. Anzalotti's team finished up work on the partially completed Season 1, while Leopold was part of the team that delivered the completely redesigned and recast Season 2. After JQ, they worked on what is possibly still the single best piece of Scooby-Doo media ever made, Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Now, don't feel bad for David Kirschner. According to Hollywood Reporter, Turner did like a lot of the initiatives that Kirschner had spearheaded at the studio, and sought to find a way to keep him in the company. Kirschner, for his part, was apparently starting to gravitate away from animated TV and more towards filmmaking again. Thus, they split off the feature division of Hanna-Barbera into its own unit, Turner Feature Animation, and this company is most notable for producing Cats Don't Dance, which Warner Brothers distributed in 1997 after the Time Warner-Turner merger. Kirschner continues to produce. His most notable work after Hanna-Barbera is Hocus Pocus, the cult Disney Halloween favorite, which he produced and provided the story for. He continues to produce to this day, with credits including Titan AE, Curious George, and of course all those Chucky projects. As for Pirates of Darkwater, it joined the Cartoon Network lineup on January 3rd, 1994, and was a staple on the network for much of the mid-90s. I'd wager most people familiar with the show probably discovered it through reruns on Cartoon Network. Speaking personally, I discovered it on Cartoon Network. The show evidently gained enough of a following that Cartoon Network began getting letters asking if the show was ever going to be finished. Cartoon Network, being cheeky bastards, put together this frankly amazing Cartoon Network response spot.
This is where we take the time to answer letters and email from you, our beloved viewers. Welcome to Cartoon Network Responds. Here's a letter from Laverne. Dear Cartoon Network, what about the last episodes of the Pirates of Darkwater? I really want to know what happens to them. Laverne, What a great question. You are in luck, because right here in my hand are the only existing copies of the lost, never-before-seen episodes of The Pirates of Dark Water.
Watch as the cat laps the milk. Lapping and lapping and lapping.
Hey, who's been messing with the tapes?
Lapping and lapping.
What the? Oh, wouldn't you know it? Somebody must have taped over the last episodes of The Pirates of Dark Water. Well, until next time, pen pals, stay tuned for more of your letters right here on Cartoon Network Responds.
Insinuating that the only copy of the finale was taped over is so diabolical that it's brilliant. This promo is a great example of how godlike Cartoon Network's promo department was during the mid-90s. But that begs the question, were there ever plans to actually finish Dark Water? And sadly, the answer appears to be no. While I'm sure there was a roadmap to the series' intended conclusion, production stopped at episode 21. There were no scripts or outlines commissioned after that point. Now, that begs another question. Can the finale happen now in 2025? And well, I'd say probably not. This is an over 30-year-old property. At this point, it's probably more worthwhile to think reboot and not continuation. The actors are no spring chickens. Hector Elizondo is now nearly 80. Ownership of the series has passed to Warner Brothers, which has greatly pared back its animated offerings in recent years, and they've had a spotty track record with retro reboots. Thundercats got 2 revivals, and both were pretty big failures, and Thundercats is a far more popular property than Pirates of Dark Water ever was. And also, let's just take into account the streaming landscape. Many shows don't get more than 1 season. Pirates of Dark Water got 3 in a much different broadcast environment. A reboot of Pirates of Dark Water would likely not get that many chances. But, you may ask, Dungeons & Dragons and 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo got finales. Surely Dark Water can get one? Yes, and both are special cases. Dungeons & Dragons got its ending based on an unproduced script, something that, again, does not exist for Pirates of Dark Water. And as for 13 Ghosts, that's a Scooby-Doo project, and WB will never miss an opportunity to make money with Scooby-Doo. The most likely medium we'd see a continuation or a reboot would be in comics. Greg Weisman has written a few new seasons of Gargoyles for the comics, and Power Rangers has had a really awesome line of comics for years now. Hell, they're even doing a new take on Captain Planet this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if a Dark Water comic happens down the line, even if the chances seem fairly remote right now. Now, a finale was produced, of sorts. Pirates of Dark Water got video game adaptations for Super Nintendo and Genesis in 1994. They're both very different games. The Super Nintendo effort is a beat 'em up, basically Final Fight with the Dark Water characters grafted onwards. Control Ren, Tula, and Ayaz as they fight against such foes as Tall Pirate, Big Pirate, and Lady Pirate. It ends with the crew of the Wraith gathering all the treasures and then promptly losing them, going oh well and going on with their day. Now, I would have thrown my Super Nintendo through the goddamn window if I saw that ending. I am a Super Nintendo fangirl through and through, but the Genesis version is better. God, that hurt my soul. The Genesis game is an action platformer that is far closer to the cartoon, and while it, like the Super Nintendo game, lacks the cartoon's iconic theme, it is basically everything else you'd expect from the show. It's an incredibly accurate adaptation. But it's the Genesis game that has the closest thing that Dark Water ever got to an ending. It features the crew facing off against the Dark Dweller and sealing him away once and for all. It's a story beat largely recycled from the last episode of Season 1, yes, but the game has a special thanks credit to David Kirschner, which makes me think that ending is at least part of what was planned for the actual series. We'll probably never know. However the story was supposed to end, David Kirschner would be the one to know. And going across several interviews for this project, I haven't seen him actually talk about Darkwater. So I don't know what the plans were. But why does Darkwater matter? Why is it still so fondly remembered? It's because Darkwater walked so Batman and X-Men could run. Pirates of Darkwater is a crucial step in the evolution of the action cartoon in the early 90s. It belongs in the general conversation of the cartoon renaissance of the period, and is probably as important to the history of animation as fellow Hanna-Barbera shows Two Stupid Dogs and Dexter's Laboratory. Experiencing the World of Myrr for this project as an adult was actually a lot of fun. The show holds up a lot better than you would expect a cartoon of the period to hold up. The show is really well executed. The voice acting is top notch, with Elizondo and Peters probably the two standouts. The writing is top tier, at least by the standards of early 90s cartoons. We're not exactly at the pinnacle of the form exemplified by X-Men and Batman, but you can see steps towards that approach with Darkwater. When you compare it to stuff like G.I. Joe and Transformers, this is a huge breath of fresh air. And the lore, the world building is fantastic. It's a vividly imagined and detailed world that feels real in a way that most action cartoons of the time did not. Even in the episodes not featuring Block, we travel to strange and exciting corners of the world. Myrr feels like a world that actually exists, a place where adventures can happen at any time. The canvas on which a pretty good tabletop RPG campaign or a well-designed video game can take place. In fact, a tabletop RPG was actually produced in 1994. There's still teething pains, of course. The animation, like I said, takes a tumble after the miniseries. Again, I don't think it's necessarily bad, and it's a cut above something like X-Men, but it does feel clumsy in quite a few spots. If Darkwater was made today, you'd probably have animation that would be more consistent at the very least. Darkwater is not a hard show to revisit. While it's not on streaming, that's Warner Brothers for you, it's not lost. You can buy the show on DVD from Amazon, and it's available for digital purchase on iTunes and Amazon Video. It's not a huge time commitment, and anyone interested in the history of animation should definitely check this show out. I hope we do end up revisiting Myrr someday, either as a reboot, or a continuation, or some other way. It doesn't feel right to leave things as unresolved as they are. Maybe the fourth time with Darkwater could be the charm. Next time, we go meta as the Fox Kids Club talks about the Fox Kids Club. Beware of kids hosts and janky fursuits. Who do I talk to about this footage? Why do we keep using this mascot too? I need to speak to the manager. A couple shoutouts I want to give before we go. First, I want to thank Margaret Lesh for graciously agreeing to be interviewed about her time at Fox Kids. You'll be seeing her insights going forward on the crucial early years of the network, something that doesn't really come up in other interviews she's done. Second, I want to plug piratesofdarkwater.net. This is a fan site that goes into a lot of detail about the show, including character art, the writer's Bible, and even the tabletop RPG books. It's a great site and a great relic from when the internet didn't solely consist of just 3 websites. And finally, this isn't related to Darkwater per se, but I wanted to give a shout out to Joshua Moore's new book, More Phenomenal: How the Power Rangers Conquered the World, which hits bookstores on May 20th. I was honored to be selected as a beta reader for the book, and I can say, without a doubt, that this is the definitive chronicle of the entire Power Rangers franchise. I've included a link to buy it in the description. Thanks for watching, y'all. It's rough out there, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm going to keep making these videos so I can be a light in the darkness. Please don't forget to support this video by liking, subscribing, hitting the bell icon for notifications, and boosting this video to everyone you know. I'm Jess Matthews. Good luck, and be well.
Noichi Tot!